Hi everyone, my name is Leah Kopke and I'm a 3D motion design freelancer. I also have a podcast where each week I cover another 3D modeling tool for Cinema 4D. Hello and welcome. Today we are going over the draw brush inside of Cinema 4D, all the settings and everything you can do with it. You will know by the end of today's episode. Let's go ahead and get started. Here we are inside of Cinema 4D. The first thing that I'll do is switch over to our sculpting mode so that we can see all of our handy tools over here. You can find your sculpting tools under the mesh menu, under here where it says sculpt. You can find your brush tools. But while in sculpting mode, you can also just see most of your tools listed off here to the side, which is super helpful. We'll drop in our cube primitive and we'll drop in a plane primitive. So now we both have primitives in here. These are parametric objects, and that means they have additional settings in here that we can adjust. For our plane, we're going to increase the width segments and the height segments to 100 both ways. And for our cube, we'll adjust our segments to be 30 by 30 by 30. And you can see this update here. Now, when I click off the cube and the plane, I can't see my lines, so I'll turn on garage shading lines so that we can see our polygons here. I just want these meshes to be dense enough so that you can see what this tool is doing when we work with it. Now, like other mesh tools and other sculpting tools inside of Cinema 4D, they do not work on primitives. We need to make these editable meshes. So we'll select both of these and hit the C hotkey, which will make these both editable meshes. You'll see their icons have changed here. And the other way you can make these editable is, of course, this button down here, make editable. We just use the hotkey. They both do the same thing, though. And now that we've done that, our brush tools are no longer grayed out and we can use them. Last time we went over the grab brush. Today we're going over the draw brush. So it's right over here. And something really helpful is if you hover over these tools, they give you a brief idea of what these do. The draw tool says it pulls or pushes the surface. But I think it's easier to just see what it does by using it. Now we have these different tabs here for various settings. Similar to our grab brush, we have our size settings, and you can adjust the size of your brush in here with this handle. You can also adjust it using the right and left bracket keys. You can also adjust it using the middle mouse button. So very similar to the grab brush in that sense. You can turn on link size here or here. These both do the same thing. This icon up here does the same thing as this one down here, and that'll just keep your brush size the same when you switch between brushes. So that's the first setting here while you're using this tool. And I'll just click and drag my mouse so that you can see what it starts to do. So this is pretty light right now. If we want to make more of an indent in our mesh that's a little bit more visible, we can increase something called the strength. And the strength is this slider right here. So I'll crank this up and you can go above 100% by just clicking here and dragging. So I'll go ahead and use it now, and you can see that's a huge difference from that first option here. So we can not only adjust the size, we can adjust the strength in here. You can, of course, link strength, and you can click this button here, or you can click that option on and off up here. It's also available as an icon in order to control the strength of this brush while you're using it. That is all very helpful to know. We will cover what link stencil is once we start going through those settings. Let's go over how backface works. So there's a front side and a back side to every mesh, and you can see that a little bit more when you click on the polygons. The front side is orange and the back side shows up as purple. If I were to try to use the drop brush on the front side, it works as normal. If I were to try to use it on the back side, it's no longer affecting it unless we turn on back face hair. So now we can see this affecting it. So you can draw on both sides of the mesh if you'd like. I'm going to turn off back face and undo that for right now because it's not necessary. Keep visual size, this doesn't usually work for me, but it keeps the size of your brush about the same whether if you zoom in or zoom out. But I like to keep that off, and it usually is pretty buggy anyways where it doesn't work. Now preview mode works the same as with the grab brush that we covered previously. On surface means that our brush will be angled according to the surface we have our mouse over. Screen will keep it always relative to the direction we're looking. The camera that we're looking through, this will always be parallel to the camera. Off, we can't see our brush at all. And I actually don't like this because I like to be able to see the size of my brush as well as the fall off. So I'll keep this as on surface. And I'll undo what I just drew there. We'll come back to this link stencil in a little bit. Over in our settings, we have other options. We have our fall off here. And this controls the shape of our brush and how it falls off around that circumference. So if I change this to straight, you'll see that our brush hair has also adjusted its shape to show a straight line. And when I drag my mouse, you'll see that that shape is a little bit different than over here. You can customize this however you'd like. So I can do something like this and change the shape. And you'll see the show when we draw with it. And you can see this update again on my brush. So that's the shape we're now creating. It's a little bit different. Hit undo a few times to go back. If you ever want to undo this and go back to the default fall off shape for your brush, you can just hit this reset button here. You can load a preset in here, like the triangle one, and then you'll have a new custom brush here. Cosine. So I'll hit undo on those. There's this really handy tool, steady stroke. I'm going to reset this back, but for the steady stroke, it helps smooth out your lines. And you can choose how much it's smoothed out based on this length here. So if I click and drag my mouse, you'll see this line show up. And that's taking the average of my mouse's movement and smoothing it out so that this is smoother than what my hand could draw. If I have a little bit of a shaky hand one day drawing with my Wacom pen or my mouse, this will smooth it all completely out. And a lot of people like to draw with that if they want really precise lines. It's one way to do it, is by turning on steady stroke and adjusting the length. You can save your fall off adjustments here. As a preset by choosing a name for it, a database, and a category if you'd like. I'm going to hit cancel because I don't want to save that. There's another option here called spacing. So I'm going to turn off steady stroke, hit undo a few times, and turn on our spacing and bump this up to a pretty large amount. I can click and draw with my mouse. And it might be a little bit difficult to see from this angle, but we are creating a line here, but each one of these is a little bit further spaced out. You may be able to see this a little bit better if we use an example like a stamp in here. So we're going to actually load in a stamp. The stamp is similar to what we covered for the grab brush. I'll go ahead and turn on stamp right here. And like the grab brush, we have an image option and we have a material option. I'm going to drop in a button image into here. So I'll go into our asset browser, presets, sculpting brush presets, our texture folder, and within the texture folder, I'll find buttons. So we have this button texture here that we can use, and this is different than the button preset up here. I'm choosing the one within the texture folder if you're looking for the same one, because there's two that look similar. This is the one we're looking for. I'll drag and drop this into our image, and now we have it loaded, which is fantastic. We can begin drawing. This is very light, so we're going to definitely need to increase the strength quite a bit here so that our buttons really start showing up. So if you notice, these shapes look different, and I just reset our fall off. So something really important to remember when you're using stamps is that there's this option down here called fall off. And this is overlaying your fall off from here over your texture, which changes the shape. So if you don't want that to happen, turn off this fall off option. And then if you click and drag, it won't be overlaying the fall off and it'll look a little bit different. You can see your bump map for when you're drawing with the brush symbolized down here in black and white values to see what's raised and what's lowered. When I turn on the fall off and you keep your eye on here, you'll see that the colors changed, that this became a little bit darker along the edge. So that's how it's affecting it. It's affecting how that surface is being interpreted. You have this option follow here, and follow, what that'll allow you to do is have the buttons follow in the direction of your mouse. So they'll actually rotate according to the curvature of the mouse, whereas before they were all just facing the same way. I'm going to undo a few times just to clear everything off of here. We may be able to see that a little bit better with a different type of texture. So let me dig around in here to see if I can find a good example. Maybe we could try doing this with scales. I'll drag the scales into the image. So you can see the direction of the scales changes according to the direction I'm drawing on the mesh. It's staying the direction of that motion. Whereas if I turn off follow, it's going to go the same direction regardless of which direction my mouse is going. So hopefully you can see that subtle change in there with the scales. I'm going to hit undo a few times. We also have this button here called Show Depth. Green is where it's raised. Red is where it's lowered. You can adjust the gray value here. And you can see that actually raises and lowers this. So let's go ahead and have it at 0 and draw over here. That's with it green. Let's turn it all the way up to 1 and draw over here. This is with it red. It's indenting into the surface. If you have it somewhere in the middle, it's a little bit of both. Black values are neither being raised or lowered. Green are being raised, red are being lowered. So that's just good to know while you are sculpting and adding textures to your mesh. Bilinear, what that does is it smooths out the pixels in your actual image. If you have that turned on, it may be hard to see in this instance, but if we had a more pixelated image, you would see that the bilinear helps smooth it out. And close will change the shape from being circular to being just the texture in the center of the circle. So this will be a rectangle or a square now rather than circular. So you have that as an option. We're going to go over flip symmetry in a little bit because I have a fun example for that. You can adjust the rotation here. So now you can see the rotation's going a different way for our brushes than before. I'll set that back to the default by right-clicking on it, and now everything is cleared out. You can also use a material similar to the grab brush. You can use a material for the stamp. The important thing to keep in mind for that when you're texturing is that the one that works is the standard material, and you can add in any texture you want here. You could add in a wood texture. You could add in see, they have a wood texture here that you could add in. You could use galaxy, there's a lot of fun things in here. But the most common thing to choose from actually would be to use the noise options because there's such a great library of noises in here. And we showed a little bit of how that would work with the grab brush the other day. It's the same concept here. You just need to go ahead and turn on the stamp, add in your material with the noise added, and you can see that noise is being applied. Like a stamp. We'll go ahead and hit undo to go back to how it was before. The cool thing about this one is the stencil option. So I'm actually going to turn off our stamp here, and we're going to use a stencil. Now, a fun one that I actually found in here is that there's this one called face parts, and you can add in an eye as a stencil. And right now it's really, really faded on our screen. There's a lot of transparency to it. You can adjust the transparency with this transparency button here. So you can choose how much of this you're seeing on here and how much of this you're actually seeing your screen, and show this on the cube. So you can see that you can use this as a stencil to actually draw on the mesh. So now it's taking on that eye shape, which is kind of cool. And you can see that's also working on the plane here. Now, the reason why I wanted to show this right now is because, okay, so we have a stamp of an eye. What if you wanted to go the other way for the other side? You can actually do that Within here, you can flip the direction and you can see a preview of the texture here, and what you can do is flip this. And then draw again. And then you can see you have the eye going a different way. Maybe I'll try flipping it along the X. Sometimes it can be a little bit confusing knowing which way the eye is going. So flipping along the X seems to flip it this way so that this is going one way and then the other one's going the other way. There's even a nose texture, which is kind of fun, or one for ears. So it's a fun way to sculpt. Like you get pretty much an instant nose. I mean, you can of course reshape this and smooth it out and define it a little bit more, but it's actually a pretty decent way to get a starting point with the shape of a nose, is using that stencil. And again, you can adjust the transparency here. You can adjust the angle of your texture here. You can adjust the scale. You can make it smaller if you want. You can move it to the right or the left. And up and down using this X and Y coordinates there. You can choose to tile it, and then you can tile it in the X as well as in the Y if you want to create a repeating pattern of some sort. Maybe if you're making tiles or fabric, that could make sense to give that a try. Can adjust the gray value similar to the stamps, and you know how that works at this point. So it's the same way as the gray value in the stamps that we had shown earlier. You can add in a material like before to the stencil, like the noise. But again, this works best with the legacy materials. So you can get some pretty cool effects in here. I'm gonna smooth out these noses, or maybe just remove them altogether. So that's kind of cool to know is there while sculpting faces. A lot of people like to create those elements by hand, but if you were to create a bump map of a feature that you like that you're going to use on a lot of characters, this is one way you could easily add it, like the air here. Airs can be pretty hard and time consuming to 3D model, and you could use it here and just make your life easier, which is cool. You can load a stencil preset you've already made, or save one, or just clear what you've done all together. And we were talking about stencils and that there's this option here called Link Stencil. Now you know what it is referring to. If you want to use this stencil with other brushes, you can. Like if you want to use this with the grab brush, but you didn't want to have to do that setup each time for each brush you switch to, you can choose Link Stencil, and then regardless of which other brush I click on, as long as if it has a stencil, I can reuse my stencil setup for that new brush because it's linked. And you can also link it up here. It has an icon. So that's fun to know that's there. And you'll see that the stamp settings for flip symmetry and flip X and flip Y are very similar to flipping the symmetry for the stencil. So you can have those options in both of these. They work the same, which should make it easy to remember. We went through these settings here. We covered spacing, edge detect. Let's use our cube for the edge detect option. So edge detect, if you are drawing on an object, but you don't want to go beyond an edge, like what I can do here. I want to make sure these stencils are off right now. Our stamps are off, our stencils are off. We're back to the default. If I didn't want to draw on that edge so easily, I can turn on edge detect. And you'll see it kind of stops right now at that edge. So if I didn't want to go over, now it's a lot harder to accidentally go over that edge. So that's a helpful tool to know is there. This angle is determined by the normals of the mesh, and we've talked about normals quite a bit in here. I'll leave a link to those episodes if you don't know what a normal is. It's the direction of a polygon. As we talked about, there's a right side of a polygon and a wrong side of the polygon, and the normal direction of the polygon is tangent to the direction that that polygon is facing. So those numbers are being used to make calculations about where edges are. So what Cinema 4D is doing behind the scenes is it says this polygon's normal is facing this many degrees this way, and this polygon is facing this many degrees this way, comparing their normal directions, and then the variance between those two normal directions is being used to find edges. So when you are entering in an edge angle, that's the way you are calculating it. If the angle deviation between the normals is greater than the angle defined here, the brush will not affect those. So let's just go ahead and show how this works. So if we make this arrow, you could see that it really takes a lot to start affecting that other side. If we make this 90 degrees, this is already being pulled, the surface, because of how much we increased it. So that's basically how that works. So when you get into maybe more detailed areas like this, if you keep it lower, you're less likely to start affecting other areas that are going at a different angle. But if you increase this quite a bit, then you can easily start adjusting this eye. If you just want to stay away from that edge, then you could make the angle much lower, and it won't, while you're sculpting, you aren't affecting the details in the eye as much. That is how your edge detect works. This next setting that I want to show you, there's a little bit of a catch to it. So I'm going to go ahead and show you within Cinema 4D how it works. I am dropping in a new cube into my scene, and I'm going to set it up about the same way as before. Hit C to make it editable. So now we have this cube, and if we were to use our draw brush and drop a stamp in here and I'm just going to use this pattern here. So now we have a pattern in there. You'd think that if you decided to use the option drag rectangle or drag dabs, this would work on this rectangle now. This would work on this cube right now, because in theory, all you need for drag rectangle or drag dabs to work would be to add in your stamp image here, you'd think. But there's a little bit of a catch to this. We have different draw modes, and by default we use this one here, freehand, and that's the most common one. However, there are times when you might want to draw out a texture, and that's where draw rectangle or draw dabs comes in helpful. And I've noticed that this tool doesn't work unless if you hit this unsubdivide button here. And then you click on this new one and hide the original. Once you do that, you are able to use drag rectangle on it. And that's how drag rectangle is supposed to work. In theory, most of the sculpting tools work on a mesh regardless of if it has this sculpting tag added to it, which is what is added when you hit the unsubdivide. So that's a little bit of a bug perhaps that I found. And we're actually going to go more into depth of what the subdivide and unsubdivide are within Cinema 4D for sculpting pretty soon. But that's just something I wanted to show you, just because I found that really kind of unintuitive that that's the way it works, and it's not something they point out in the manual to you either. So even if you went through the trouble of reading the manual, that wouldn't be clear. But that's what you need to do for that to work. And I just like to go through a little bit more of what these draw modes are and what exactly draw rectangle is. And I'll increase the strength here a little bit, increase this. But when you click and drag your mouse, you'll see the texture starts to appear. You can rotate it by moving your mouse back and forth. And you can see this update pretty well before you let go. And you can see here that our fall off is being added and it's grabbing our settings from our stamp. So if I turn off the fall off, and I click and drag, you'll see that updates accordingly. Our fall off is no longer affecting this pattern. So this can be really interesting and helpful for adding textures to objects or adding in some little imperfections and details. We have some more options for the draw mode, and these draw mode settings are all under the settings tab. Freehand is the one we're used to. That's it there. You have drag rectangle that we went over, drag dabs. You basically can drag the texture wherever you'd like and let go, and that's where the texture will live. You may be able to see this a little bit more clearly if I make the size bigger with my right bracket. And once you're ready to place the texture, you can. There's another option in here, line. You can draw with lines. What you do for that is you click to create points, and we're creating lines. If you hit the backspace, it will undo the last line you created. If you double click, it'll complete that and create that texture going along the line. The next option is lasso fill. And you'll see these options that have fill at the end of it come with additional settings like fill symmetry or fill back faces. Fill back faces will also affect the back faces of your mesh. The lasso tool, you can just draw a shape and let go, and it'll fill in that selection with that texture. Fill symmetry will apply the texture symmetrically if you have it on and you are using symmetry. We'll cover symmetry more in the future, but that is just letting you know that this tool has the option of being used with the symmetry options. Polyfill is a little bit different than the lasso, but you can create a shape using lines. And then when you're done, you can hit enter and it will create a closed shape with the pattern inside. Rectangle fill You just make a rectangular shape and fill it in with the texture is basically how that works. And I'm going to use this with fill back faces on. And you can see that it fills all the way through here. It goes all the way through the back faces of the mesh and affects everything. Just so you're aware. I'm going to undo so that this is a nice clean cube. And I'm going to do that one more time. Here we go. And now you can see that went all the way through the entire cube, affecting the back faces as well. You have options for your draw mode in terms of direction. I have mine set to normal. You can set it to X, Y, Z, or camera. If you choose camera, it's relative to the direction of the camera that the texture will be applied. If you are using a Wacom pen while using these brush settings, the computer can actually sense how hard you're pushing while you're drawing lines or sculpting inside of Cinema 4D with these tools. And the buildup will affect how quickly the pattern builds up according to that pen pressure while you're sculpting. So right now I'm using my mouse, so this won't have a huge effect. But if I were using a Cintiq right now and my Wacom pen, you'd be able to see that take place a little bit more while I'm drawing in perhaps freehand. Because your actual pen pressure, similar to drawing in real life, will affect how the surface is being pushed or pulled. And just a reminder, if you hold Control, it will apply the effect in the opposite direction. You could also invert the direction by clicking this invert button down here. So that's also another option, but I think it's a lot easier to just hold the Control button. That would be Command on Mac. If you're working on a Mac, I'm working on a PC. So that's how that works. Those are all the settings for the Settings tab. We've gone through all the settings for the Stamp tab, all the settings for Stencil. We've even gone through all the settings for the Basic tab. The last one left is Modifiers. I'm going to click Enable Modifiers. What this basically does is similar to when we were talking about modifiers with the grab brush. You can add smoothing on top of this while you use the tool. If you select smoothing, and you can increase the smoothing here. You can add the pinch effect, which is actually another brush tool here we haven't covered yet, but we will in the future, or inflate. So these are just other effects you can add on top of your existing brush. It's a lot like using more than one brush together to create a new effect. And you can control how much the other effect is taking place. So those are all the settings for this tool. I know this one was quite a bit, so I appreciate you staying here to go through all the settings with me, and I look forward to seeing you here next time on Ambient 3D Animations. Thank you so much for 3D modeling with me.